Hi, it's Stacey Tuttle with Bridges 527. I want to share a hopefully quick-ish discussion about Peter Rabbit to the Runaway. I want to give you a little bit of background on the story, why I thought it was some of the great elements in it, and then some questions you can have for discussion with whomever you might see it with. And I know it's going to lend itself to parents and kids going, but honestly, some of the things in here were really good for me to even ask my own self just to check, because these are like lifetime principles, and it was really rich. The movie was fine. It was cute, but I got super excited coming out of it about just the truths that it hit on and the conversations that I know I'm going to be able to have with especially some of the younger kids in my life, but even I'll have these same conversations with their parents and it'll be awesome. So really good stuff. So little background on the story. Peter and McGregor have been at war over the garden. They've really made their peace. McGregor's marrying Beatrix Potter. So they're going to get married. Peter has really grown and become a new person. However, as it so often happens, when you grow and change, it takes a while for everyone else to really believe that that change is real and to see the truth of it. So people he keeps saying like, no, we've made our peace. I'm going to respect the rules, whatever. And nobody really believes it. And even McGregor's a little bit, he still kind of sees Peter the old way. So he's really not encouraging the new Peter. He's skeptical. So he's still treating Peter as if he's kind of a bad rabbit. And, but not only that, everybody else expects it of him also. So they don't take him seriously when he says, we're not going to eat his tomatoes. So this is the big thing. And this is straight out of like the Garden of Eden. So it's got really neat opportunities to tie it into the Bible with this. All the rabbits have now complete flexibility to eat in the garden. They can eat of all of the fruit, all the vegetables. It's all free to them. The only thing withheld, there is a forbidden tree, and it's the tomato fruit, right? They cannot have his tomatoes, and it's in a little, fenced off area in the middle of the garden. And Peter's respecting it, and nobody expects, they think he's bluffing. And he's like, no, I'm not going to, we can have everything else, but that's his. So Peter does a good job of upholding this. However, he gets caught. The badger had been stealing a bunch of the tomatoes. Peter makes him give them all back, and Peter's holding them, about to put them back where they go when McGregor shows up. And of course, he looks horribly guilty. And he's trying to explain himself, but McGregor doesn't believe him. So he's, at this point, so discouraged. Like, well, what good is it to be good if nobody's going to believe I'm being good? If everybody suspects me of doing wrong, we eventually, if we don't live up, if we aren't living for the Lord, like when we start to live for the Lord, it really helps us, because then it doesn't matter what everyone else says. We have his opinion to live for, and he never misjudges us, which is an amazing thing to be able to explain to your kids. Like, God never misjudges your heart. He knows your heart better than you do. He sees everything. So he totally knew that Peter was doing the right thing at that moment. And had Peter been living for the Lord, instead of trying to get McGregor's opinion and approval, then it wouldn't have mattered that he was misjudged. He would say, Lord, and you'll defend me, because God is our advocate. He defends us. And this is a really great conversation to have with your kids, or with yourself. But we don't have to defend ourselves. That's God's job. But that's only going to really work for us when we are living for his approval first and foremost. Of course, that's a little out of the scope of this movie. So Peter gets caught, gets judged harshly, and you're either going to, if you're not living for the Lord's approval, then you're going to live up to man's expectation or down to their expectations, depending on how they look at you. And he kind of got to this point, and we saw the same thing in Cruella. If you saw that, where she goes, if people want a villain, fine, I'll give them a villain. Like, same thing here. He's like, fine, everybody thinks I'm a bad seed. What's the point of being good then? So he kind of derails, and you hear him ruminating over and over and over, like, I guess I'm just a bad seed. And he starts to believe. He rehearses the negative things, he agrees with them, and then starts to act them out. And yet all the while he feels dirty inside, because he wanted to be a better person, a better rabbit. Like, he saw good in himself, but no one else did. And so he began to question if it was there at all. So much human nature wrapped into this little movie. Like, it's so rich with just our own struggles with these things. So, a lot of issues of identity in this. What do you identify with? How do you change your identity? What happens when people don't see where you are? Anyways, the ending was super awesome. And here's why. Him and McGregor reconcile, but they both ask for forgiveness. They both grow and change and mature. They both take accountability for their part, and neither one blames the other one for anything. And part of the reason this is a big deal for me is I see a lot of movies or TV shows where the grown-ups are the bumbling idiots who do all the growing up, and the children are the all wise and all knowing. And sometimes the children have been disobedient and disrespectful. Their parents have boundaries in place to keep them safe, and then later they apologize for having normal boundaries. Like, I go back to, I don't mean to totally derail here, but there was a movie I saw a million years ago when I was babysitting, and I only saw parts of it, but the general gist of it was these little girls go to Paris, I think, with their parents, and they meet a boy, they hop on the motorcycle, they go clubbing and all around and whatever with this kid. They're like, 15, 16, whatever. They think they're old enough. And then later in the movie, the dad apologizes for being overprotective. And I'm like, no, you were just being a good dad. Like, I'm sorry. This is a terrible movie because that is a dangerous thing. A parent should say, no, you don't meet some random stranger and hop on their bike and go clubbing in a foreign nation. Like, you shouldn't probably do that in America nonetheless, but especially you don't even speak the language. There's nobody there. Nobody knows where you are. You're sneaking out. Like, this is dangerous. I used to joke. I'm like, you ought to let your kids watch Taken, because it may not be as clean as this movie was, but it's actually got a way better message, and it will teach your kids to be respectful. Because I'm sorry, she had to apologize to her dad for being, going out and being stupid. Her dad wasn't being overprotective. He was being wise. And so I have been really frustrated at this movie where parents are just parenting and doing well, and then they apologize for it later. And I'm like, that's not a good, kids need to obey their parents. So again, this movie, they both grow and apologize. And it's not just the the parents who apologize for being too much or whatever. We see Peter throughout the whole movie being a little bit irresponsible, being sinful, being human as a rabbit, whatever, and growing. And it's so relatable because, I'm sorry, kids know that they are not perfect. And it's really good for them to see that acted out and to watch someone take accountability for their actions and grow, because they need to learn how to do that themselves. So the adult models it. He also needs to grow, but the rabbit, the young one, he also is growing and maturing and taking accountability and learning he can make mistakes and recover from them. I don't think we're communicating that in our culture as well as we probably should. So lots of really good things that happen in the way this was all resolved. Let me talk to you about some questions though that I think would be really great to jump into with your kids or whomever it may be. First was, and these are not in any real particular order, are just things that I was thinking of as I was kind of pondering this. So what negative things have been spoken into your life? And I've asked several kids, not because of this movie, but just in the past, I've had kids sit down and write a list of every lie, every negative thought. And they're like, how do I know if it's a lie? I'm like, well, Jesus speaks things that are true, noble, right, lovely, excellent, admirable, or praiseworthy, right? Is that Philippians 4:8? He speaks those things into our lives. He is always positive. He is never shaming. He may be convicting, but he's never shaming. He's never negative. He loves you. So the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy. He is negative and critical and shaming. So anything that feels negative or shaming, like that's the enemy. If it's positive, that's probably Jesus. So we've talked about these things, and I'll ask them, like, what are the negative things you believed about yourself? And then we can even ask, like, where does it come from? Did someone say that? Is that just a thought in your head? Did you believe that? Is that from television? Like, where are these lies coming from? They're ultimately from the enemy, but who's speaking them into you? How did you start to believe them? So what negative things have been spoken into you? So then after I'll do that with the kids, we'll often sit down and say, okay, what does God say about you? And I'll ask them, like, can you get quiet and pray and ask the Lord to tell you what he thinks about you? Other times we'll go, what's a Bible verse that actually speaks a truth about this? So maybe they tell me what they feel God's saying to them. Like, I hate this. I had a kid tell me she hated her freckle. I've had a couple of kids tell me that. And I'm like, you have one freckle on your face, and they're totally bothered by it. And then I'm like, well, what does God say? He says you're fearfully and wonderfully made. And so they're like, well, he likes my freckled. And then we'll talk about, well, here's a verse for that. You're wonderfully made. And then we'll memorize that verse. And so every time this thought comes up that I hate myself because of this, they can remember this other thing, right? Or things about their mind. Well, you have the mind of Christ. So there's nothing wrong with your mind. Even if you feel like you're a little slow in school, God gave you his mind, and he's not dumb. So we'll just work on different verses to combat. And whether, like I said, whether it's an actual verse or just something that they feel God saying, I've had them literally write it side by side. Here's the lie, here's the truth. And so they can look at it. Every time this thing pops up in their head, they've got a truth to combat it with. Because in the end, part of the deal was Peter believing he was a bad seed. And what McGregor did was he said, you were not a bad seed. And I'm sorry I let people say that about you. And I made you feel that way. So, but he combated. He didn't really tell him good things about him, but he at least said, that's a lie. And that's not true. Okay. So question, what negative things have been spoken into you? Did you, or do you still believe them? And have you rehearsed it? Because we saw Peter just kind of ruminating on that thing. So, okay, did you believe it? Are you rehearsing that in your mind? Because every time you do, you're basically agreeing with the enemy about what's being spoken over you. One of my questions, how does that make you feel? If it makes you feel icky inside, that's not from the Lord. So even recognizing, like, every time you're rehearsing this, you're actually making yourself feel bad inside. You don't have to do that. You can actually stop believing these things. If they don't make you feel good, don't believe it. So, do you think that thing is true? And sometimes it's good. Do you feel that it's true, or do you think that it's true? It's good to kind of ask how they interpret it. But then the next question I would say was, well, what does God say? You may believe that it's true because everybody has said it, or because it feels true because I've done this or whatever. I think I'm a bad person because I did this. Okay, but what does God say? And then he says that you're totally forgiven, so it doesn't matter. He loves you anyways, and he's making you a new creation. So that old is gone away. So even if you were a bad person, are you anymore? Okay, so to help them start recognizing identity and truth. And just to, like, I love to help them start listening to the Lord. Does God say that about you? I think that's such a good thing. Have I made you feel that was true? And this has been sometimes it's hard to ask that question, because then you find out, like, oh, I was a part of the problem. And I've had some people tell me, like, kids come up and go, you made me feel this way. And I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry, because I don't believe that about you. Or sometimes I'm like, okay, I was kind of feeling that way, if I'm honest. And that's on me. I need to change that. And what happens is I've actually been able to turn things around, because there have been some things spoken that you go, okay, yes, you're a really big, vibrant personality. And sometimes that's a little bit of a lot to handle, but other times, so God designed you this way. So yes, that can everything has its shadow side, right? So yes, there may be a negative connotation that some people don't always receive it well, but do I think God has a plan for that? Yes. Here's the good side of that. Here's how I think God's going to use that in your life. I go back to, like, Ezekiel. God's talking about, my people are strong, they're stubborn, they don't listen to anybody, blah, 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 blah. They're a real pill to deal with. And he's like, but I made you really strong and stubborn. And he tells Ezekiel, I made your forehead hard and stubborn and strong, just like theirs. And I was like, oh, I bet his mom struggled to raise. I bet he was special as a child, because the Bible makes such a point of how stubborn and strong he was. Probably not an easy trait to raise, but yet God had such a purpose for that, because he had planned, he goes, you were strong enough to handle my people. And so I've made you to go head to head with them, that you can stand up to them. Your forehead is strong enough to butt heads with them. And so there was a purpose for that. So yeah, maybe that was maybe not everybody's favorite quality about him growing up, but God had a plan for it. So I think to recognize these things that feel really true to us, and they've always been spoken about us as if it's negative. Like growing up, I was always teased because I talked too much. So I just tried to quit talking. I really got shut down for a couple years, but now I'm realizing maybe God's just given me something to say, and the enemy's trying to rob me of that, right? So often you will recognize that the thing in your children's lives, or your life, or whoever that is most attacked, is often the place of God's greatest calling and blessing on your life. And so the enemy wants to shut it down. So to help these kids go, okay, did I make you feel that way? How can we turn that around? Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I'm so sorry. If I did, I need to own it and change it. But let's also help you understand where the gift is in these things. Because some of these qualities are, like I said, it's just places where we need to grow, but it's not something we want to shut down. It's just something that God's going to use. And so the enemy's trying to thwart it at every corner and shut it down. He will either try to make something hyper, make it perverted, or make it stop. Because he doesn't want us to operate in the purity of that gift. So he will, again, accelerate it so that it's like manic, he will pervert it, or he will completely shut it down. And you'll see that happening in kids' lives, in your own life, whatever. Okay, so last two questions. If this lie that you're believing is not true, then what is true? And again, even if it is partly true, what's God's truth about this? Like, how does God want to use this quality in your life? Some of them are blatant lies, right? Like, your freckles are causing a problem. No, your freckle is fine. Like, you need to quit focusing on that, because God made you fearfully and wonderfully, and he put that there on purpose. But if you talk too much, maybe you do, maybe you can learn to temper it, but maybe God has a plan for all your words. Maybe God gave you something to say, right? Secondly, the last question, are you ever tempted to act as if this thing is true simply because everyone believes that it is? If they all believe it's true, if everybody thinks I'm a villain, I'll be a villain. Like, are you tempted to act out according to what everybody else says about you? I think that's a really interesting question, even for myself to ponder. Now, the good thing is, when we're believing what God says about us, he speaks things into existence even before they are. So he sees who he's made us to be even before we come that. So it's really cool, because we can start becoming those things. If we will hear what he's saying about us, like, gosh, you believe that about me? I'm not there yet. But he's always speaking to who he's making us to be. He's always calling us up in better ways, right? Into higher things. So when we can start acting out what he says about us, even before it's true, that's a beautiful thing. The problem is, so often we use that, our kind of natural tendency to act out what other people say about us, we use it in the negative. We need to turn that into the positive, but to recognize, like, oh gosh, I'm totally being critical over here because people think I'm that way anyways. It doesn't matter. So to kind of recognize where we're doing that, I think that's an incredible amount of ownership, right? So, which is what Peter did. I shouldn't have believed it. Because I believed it, I acted like it. I should not have believed what they said about me. Because he started recognizing, and what is that great quote about, be careful of your words or your thoughts, because they become actions and they become habits and whatever. There's that whole thing, right? Your thoughts become words, become beliefs and actions and patterns and whatever. So, he really took ownership of that. So like I said, they're not pointing to Jesus as much in this. I mean, it's not a Christian movie, but it's totally a layup. It's a complete layup. So like, okay, Peter didn't know to live up to what God said about him, but he recognized he was living up to the wrong things. But what if he could know what God said about him and start living up to that? Like, that would be amazing. And so to help all of us do that, but especially with these young ones who are going to this movie, it is such a sweet opportunity to talk about our relationships with them, their relationship with authority figure. I don't have children, so but I babysit and I have nieces and nephews and whatever. So, but to talk about like their relationship with different generations and older, whether it's parents or authorities or whatever, and to start recognizing how those things are affecting them and the lies that they are believing. Because I'm telling you, I'm hearing it all over these kids that I know. They are all just, the enemy starts young and he starts lying to us at such a young age. So to start helping them unpack and start recognizing truth and separating truth from lies. My sweet little niece told me what she goes, I'm starting to recognize, like, I can hear it. Like, she's starting to recognize, like, oh, right, there's like the enemy on one side and Jesus on the other. And I'm starting to recognize that they have totally different voices and I have to choose who I'm listening to. And she's like, I think the enemy's been talking to me again. So she recognizes when he starts kind of piping in these negative thoughts and how easy it is to act out of that place. So, but there's got to be awareness, because I think so many times that's been going on, but she never knew it. And then we started having these talks and she was like, I didn't know that was happening. So now she's starting to take ownership and she's starting to take captive every thought, as the Bible said. But sometimes we don't even know that's an option. So this is a great opportunity to start talking to your kids about the option that they have, that they don't have to agree with everything that's said over them. Just because someone gives you a gift doesn't mean you have to open it, right? So they give me a gift of a negative word, I don't have to receive it. I can just send it back and I can focus on what God says instead. So hopefully this helps. I would love to hear if you guys are able to use this and have some conversations with your families or whatever. Like, please share. It would just be super sweet and I think encouraging to other people to know, like, how is this being used and how did y'all do this in your family? So thanks, everybody.